I really love that countdown.
It's good, isn't it? It's like nice and chill. We're all good.
Right?
Um,
I mean, like, the minute to kind of get it together, I don't know. I could 30 seconds would be okay. But the minute, it's like, all right, I'm gonna just chill, listen to the music, gather, get my bearings, and
yeah.
bam. Now show show
Yeah, I was like, whoa, oh, the show's happening already.
right,
Um,
exactly.
we should introduce ourselves because we haven't done this for a while. So
Oh,
I'm Dan. I am a DevRel advocate at Chef, and Kaya, who's over here,
yep.
he's also a
Hi
DevRel advocate
everybody.
at Chef Progress. So today we're going to go over Chef Inspec profile basics. I say we, Kaya is. She'll be taking the lead today. I'll be asking you a million questions of things that I've kind of picked up on the go, and then things that I probably don't know because some of the stuff that you've gone through the Linux profile that the is it which profile is it?
The
It's the Linux
Linux
baseline.
baseline. Yep.
Yeah, um, yeah. We'll see what happens there. This is some cool stuff there. But we have a couple of things to shout out. So if you're not following us on Twitter, what are you doing? Twitter.com/chef. You can find us there. A bunch of product updates. You can find updates about kind of stuff we're putting out, the other content we're putting out, which is quite nice.
Mhm.
We sometimes put out short snippets of like an inspec profile, like, hey, we did this inspec profile. How do you use that, and how do you use it in 30 seconds? How do you use it in a minute? That kind of stuff is quite nice.
Exactly.
And my Twitter, which is where some of that content starts off with, is done_web there. And that's pretty much it at the minute. I'm kind of like putting out content that I want to put out at the speed I want to put it out at. There's occasionally some retweets and that kind of stuff, but it's mostly kind of chef content. Kaya is the same as well. So Black Girl
Yep.
CTO on Twitter. We're just kind of pushing the chef content at the moment, which is cool.
Keeping it low key.
I'm just gonna blast through these this week because we've got some users on already, which is cool. So hey, if you've got any chat, if you've got any information that you want to see in the chat, just let us know and we can answer those as we're going along. And if we don't answer something, let's say during our demo, and just pop it in the chat, whichever one you're using, whether you're using sort of Twitch or YouTube or any kind of stuff, just let us know.
Yep.
Also, you can also use Chef Community if you're not on there. There's a bunch of lovely, like-minded people on the Chef Community. We've got a little bit maybe of content about policy files because one of the community members came back from us last week and said, "Hey, you did policy files, but how do policy groups work?" So a little bit of feedback from there. It's quite nice there. Some of that comes from the YouTube comments. Some of it comes from Chef Community Slack. And if you want to keep up with our releases, most of them, all of them, I think, are on Discourse. So discourse.chef.io. All of our releases are on there, and longer form, more async content is up there, which is cool. And I went
That's
through this
perfect.
earlier on. I went on the docs earlier on because I keep forgetting syntax for basically every single tool I use ever. I've been using Inspec for I don't know how many years now, probably since it's come out. I've been using Chef since it's come out as well, like version 10 or 0.1 or whatever heck it was. I'm still regularly on the docs. If I didn't write the docs as well, custom resources just got a little bit of an overhaul, which is quite nice, and unified mode is getting a little bit more of a overhaul as well. So if you use unified mode and that kind of custom resources stuff, there's some stuff that works there, which is quite nice. But without further ado, I've wasted a good 5 minutes and let our users flood in, which is cool.
Yes.
So what's our
More of a
plan for
trickle.
today,
More of
Kyle?
a trickle.
Yeah. Say flood, and we're like, can we just put a plaster on it, please?
Well, right. Well, I like the way you
Yeah.
described um Discord, Dan, as like asynchronous
Yeah.
communication. I think that was a really Thought I'd
I
point
mean,
that out.
I mean, Slack kind of technically is async.
I mean, technically, yeah,
But
you're
what
right.
usually happens is people ask a questions and they expect responses straight away, which is a
Right.
shame because someone asked me a question. They started having a conversation with me on the Chef Community Slack last night. I think it was 4:30 my time, and then by the time they got back to me and asked the next question, it was 6 my time, and I was in the middle of dinner, so I didn't answer. But if that happened on Discourse, then I would have. Yeah, we
Right.
wouldn't
We're
have lost the
gonna go
conversation.
back.
In fact, it just
Exactly.
reminded me. I'm going to go find that person right now and see if we can find him.
Yeah,
Yes.
that
What's
works.
the plan for today?
So today we're going to talk about inspect profile basics. We're going to dig into a little bit the Linux baseline profile, and I've gone ahead and set up a target node to run Ubuntu, Ubuntu box to run the Linux baseline against. So or run the Linux baseline profile against. So we're going to just be able to see kind of like the Linux baseline profile in action and kind of talk through like some of the things that we're doing in that. And
Cool.
while we're in that, we're going to kind of like go over what a profile is and, get into the nitty gritty. So let's get started. I will go ahead and okay, so before us, you will see this Linux baseline profile. I'm actually going to go on ahead and collapse this so you can kind of see like what the structure is so far. So here's what a profile is. A profile is a set of related controls in a distributable form. Um, the structure is going to consist of always an inspec.yml file. And then we'll dig kind of deeper into that in a minute. But you're going to also have controls and libraries, and then some additional files, including like your README file that you should always have in any repository that you have. But let's go into more in depth into this inspect.yml file because this is important. Okay, so your inspect YAML file is gonna like metadata for your um for your inspect profile. So you're gonna have your name, the identifier, and it's required. You can't have a profile without it. But you can have a title that's going to be your human readable title. Actually, there are some other pieces. Let me see if I can pull that up here in the docs. There's some other pieces that are missing in this actual inspect YAML, but they're not really required. But I kind of want to go through like what types of things you would expect. And for that, I'm going to bring up the document.
Yeah, the inspect docs are really nice and they're really clear and concise and they're fully formed. I think the way that the inspec as a product was developed, there's pretty good docs for basically everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't going to happen with everything because actually, like writing docs as you're going along, if it's super hard actually. So I was talking about like unified mode a second ago. Like with some products, trying to describe the thing you're implementing is really hard, and then getting some docs together on that is again like super hard. But for profile basics, like the long the short of inspec is it's so easy to explain basically everything it does.
Hmm.
So then you've got really good explanations of everything because it's like, well, it just does this.
Right.
So
Right. It's pretty
it's really
straightforward.
nice. Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
Do
Yep.
you have the? Have
Yep.
you
I
got
got
the
the
docs
doc.
over here?
I got the docs
Cool. Do you want to
open.
reshare If you reshare your screen.
Yeah, let's do
Cool.
that. Window. Okay. Share.
Cool.
All right. So, um, okay. So after this, we have maintainer. Maintainer is going to be used to specify whoever maintains the profile. That's pretty straightforward. Copyright and email address for the person who holds the copyright, your license, summary, description. I don't think that we have like description, and these things are optional. Version. Um, in the inspec version, I think in this particular case, we are greater or equal than or equal to 4.6.3. We're going to figure out by which target platforms are supported. In this case, we're using Linux. And what we don't have are inputs or dependencies for this profile. But it's because no dependencies because we're at baseline. That's right? Right, Dan?
Well, so the baseline is its own thing, but we're not requiring other things. So if you want to
Right.
inherit other
Right.
profiles, so you can inherit, like you can inherit the entire way down if you want to. I think someone correct me if I'm wrong there. Um, you can inherit other profiles basically. So you can say, right, this profile depends on this profile. So we do it with the Apache profile. There's a
Hmm.
base
Hmm.
profile, but it's literally a base profile. It gets included into other things. The Linux baseline profile is slightly different, where it's like these are the bare minimum things for security we need to have working.
Right.
The terms
Right.
are this close, but like mean like totally different things, which is a bit of a shame. So base and baseline are a bit of a misnomer there, I guess. But yes, you can say
Cool.
depends on profile A, and they give it a path. But those paths are I think they support GitHub paths, file paths, and a bunch of other things as well. I think you can do supermarket on there as well. It's in the docs that the list of like things you can pull in there is quite exhaustive, which is quite nice.
Robust.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Sweet. Oop, wait. I am sharing
Too many
the
windows.
wrong VS Code window. Okay. So let's get into what controls are. Am I sharing the right screen now? I am.
Yes.
Okay. So, well, what we're gonna talk about like so we've got control blocks, right? And then we have describe blocks. So the control keyword as listed here, or at, oop, I had it scrolled to the right control block. Okay. So the control keyword is used to declare a control block. Here, the word control means regulatory control, which is a recommendation or a requirement. A control block has a name. So in this case, we're using OS-03, and it's referred to or refers to the assigned ID of whatever regulation it implements. And a describe keyword within this is used to describe is used with a describe block to refer to an inspec resource. So in this case, we're using the file resource. We are um, checking that this directory, this it's etc/password exists. It should be a file. It should be owned by the root. And all of these tests in this describe block are going to be like our options from the file resource. Finally, here, hold on. And okay, so a resource represents a category of things that you can target. Like I said, we're talking about the file resource in this particular case. Um, and like we already talked about, if you checking for the existence of or permissions of a file, you would say something like it should exist as a test. So, like if you're saying this particular file should exist, it's very easy to read and easy to communicate the fact that it should exist. These resources, um, or this resource is used within this describe block to perform tests for the file resource. Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at your chat.
Yeah.
I didn't hear it, whatever it was. So in this case, let's see. What we did also beforehand is I set up a target, and I want to talk about what the target is. Mm-mm-mm. Hold on, I've got like my notes here.
So when we were saying targets, you sort of like you can execute inspec against a thing, can't you?
Yep. And so the thing that I would like to execute against is a virtual box, or I'm using Vagrant, set up a Ubuntu machine on Vagrant, which was actually pretty easy. I was able to get like thank you for the for the code to write. I mean, but using Vagrant is like pretty straightforward as well versus
Yeah.
manually setting everything up. But I moment, I've got notes here. But what I want to do though is kind of talk about that process and then run this Linux baseline profile against a fresh out of the box Ubuntu virtual machine, which, we've got all of the tests that we possibly could have for, a secure machine. So we're going to get some failures, right? But that's okay. We're gonna show that it works, and
Yeah.
we're going to look at our output, right? So in order to execute um, this Linux baseline profile against my Vagrant VirtualBox, I am going to, I've got it spun up. So I'm going to write inspec exec. And then actually, so I can, let's see, document. Gotta figure out. I can either do this like by um specifying the file path. There's also a way to do it like from the remote GitHub repo. But since I didn't change anything and I don't really want to go through like figuring out this file path, I'm gonna just go ahead and execute it directly from GitHub. So we're gonna do HTTPS.
So that's quite handy if you've got if you want to execute like if you're executing a remote profile that like another team is using or has built for you, and you just want to run it as part of your pipeline. You don't need to then download it and then use it. You can just go inspec exec, give me the full path if you built a profile, and it'll do it for you. So
Exactly.
it kind of handles that life cycle for you,
Yep.
which is
So you
quite
don't have
nice.
to worry about anything locally. So really, I didn't even have to download this in order to run it against my node. But what we'll do here is target the node. So we're gonna do a -t. So what we've already done, we've done inspec exec, and then we've got the GitHub URL to this Linux baseline profile. Then we're gonna do a -t. And then we're going to SSH into the vagrant box. SSH colon and vagrant. We got to do a username and password. And then the IP address. Let me get that.
So we've got actually got a question from one of the audience whilst we're waiting for that. So as soon as you hit enter, I'll start yabbering because it can take a little bit of time to download it and then executing it. In fact, whilst you're doing
Yes.
that, I'll yammer. So I'm going to hide your screen a second because we'll
Oh
just
yeah,
be
go ahead.
seeing you typing inspec exec. In fact, can we see it there? So you just we'll get the full command in a second. That's some interesting question from one of the audience. Can we have a single profile for AWS, Azure, and GCP together? Yes, you can have a completely cloud agnostic inspect profile. Let's say you needed to check a security group or something that is completely cloud, something you will find in each of the clouds, which is kind of uncommon. But let's say a DNS record or something like that. You can have that same profile executed against multiple clouds. The thing is, though, what you'll probably want to do is have a profile or a cloud specific set of resources written for each of the clouds. Because the way Azure does things and the way that AWS does things and GCP, they're all a little bit different. And Inspec has specific cloud resources for each of those clouds. So you can write a single profile and then be like, hey, if we're in GCP land, then run the GCP suite of tests if we're doing that kind of stuff there. But what you might want to do is just have a different profile, one for GCP, one for AWS, and one for Azure, because they'll just be different tests. I can go through a little bit of that has your profile started running yet?
It started
Yeah.
running.
So let me. So I'll come back to this in a second, but when we finish writing this, it's a cool question.
Take a minute.
Yeah, it took about 30 or 40 seconds earlier on. But yeah, we're just doing exec HTTPS path to the
Yep.
full path to the repo, and then target. So -t for target or dash target or work, and then SSH. SSH is one of the targets you can use. I think there's Docker, localhost, and a bunch of other ones. Please see
Right.
documentation for
Yes.
for the full list. Please see documentation. Um, there's more than I can
The docs
remember
are a
using.
good resource.
Yeah, there's some I don't ever use. I think I often use SSH. In fact, no, I don't ever use SSH. I often use Docker. So I'll target a Docker machine, a Docker
Mhm.
container, a running Docker container. So that's just Docker :// and it knows how to connect to Docker socket and do a bunch of nice things in the background. And that allows you to test within a Docker container. Super sweet. Because most of the stuff I do these days uses Docker for for my sins.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I
Um,
mean, so I'm thinking like I so everybody, well, pretty much if you've been watching this show, if you've been following this show, you kind of know that like I've come from a web development background and like semi like we've been in DevOps land for right and kind of like getting to learn all of this. And I think for me, particularly, inspect. So I learned inspect using inspect shell. What are your feelings about inspect shell, first of all? And then I'll kind of like give you from a noob's perspective, kind of how like, I know what's the face
so,
there? The face.
uh, uh, so, I have a bit of love and hate for Inspect Shell. I basically never
Okay.
use it. I think it's a good debugging tool. It's really, really helpful to have it as part of the Inspect tool itself, I think.
Hmm.
So if you come from a Ruby land, so it's a little bit similar to ERB and Pry and that kind of stuff, maybe a little bit more like ERB. ERB, what I'm on about. IRB, different things. IRB, so interactive Ruby command line, basically. So you get a command line that you can go like in real time, like write a inspect shell, write a inspect test, and then execute it. That's kind of fine, but I prefer that actually like writing it and then actually executing it outside the shell. Um,
Okay.
from a newbie perspective, um, I don't think it's useful to teach people inspect shell really early on because
Oh,
usually what I find, I mean, you might disagree with this, so I'd be really interested to see what your answer is here. But I think like inspect shell gets in your way a lot of the time, and you can just like here's a document, you can just copy and paste this control in and change it, and then do inspect exec. Like that
yeah.
workflow is like really close to like what a production workflow would look like. So then like
Right.
how
Right.
do I run this in production? Oh yeah, the way I was developing it. So there's not a huge step into the next thing. Whereas inspect shell is kind of like more of a debuggy stage. I see it.
So
So
you
I
can like debug like your tests. Is
yeah
that what you mean? Okay.
yeah
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I could see that. I like the way that like it's so I used it in the Inspect 101 course in Learn Chef. And what I really liked is that like I felt like I was, you know, almost into the thick of it without having to do so much on my actual machine. So
okay yeah.
you know, um
Although that is Learn Chef for you. Well, I'll just grab this up a second. That is Learn Chef for you though. So you have when you're up at Learn Chef, there's the virtual labs which are quite nice, and you haven't got to install anything on the machine.
right,
So then you just get placed into delicately um,
please.
the inspect shell, which is actually really cool. And maybe that's a different way of learning that, but I don't personally like that. Like it's my personal bugbear with that course is like I don't want to be teaching people about the inspect shell really early on, but actually turns out some people want to. Um,
Right. It feels like you're kind of like getting into I don't know, like I felt that I was able to use inspect without having to know all of the things surrounding it.
okay,
And even when I was able to use inspect shell on my local machine, I don't know. But maybe you're right. Maybe it is kind of like a crutch. What did you pull up? Inspect resources reference. I
yeah. So, oh, actually, I didn't
know
even like
the
respond to this person correctly. There we go. There's a link. So someone in the chat wanted to know the difference between like the cloud resources. So you've got OS resources here on the right hand side. Let me just make this a bit bigger because I'm old. So you've got the OS resources. So there's like Linux and Windows things. So there are some resources that are very specific to each of the platforms. So you couldn't make this. Hey, if I'm on Windows, run this test. If I'm on Linux, do this other test. You could totally
Mhm.
do that and make it like a agnostic baseline kind of thing. You could totally do that. I'm not really a fan of that. I'm just like, I want to run the Linux baseline. I want to run the Windows baseline. If you separate those out, because then you can give them to the Windows team and the Linux team and go, hey, Windows people, like figure out what should look good. Linux people, figure out what should look good for you people. Kind of the same thing with your clouds. You've got AWS, which are, you got your LBs, well, multiple ABs, resources, AMIs, like all these resources here. And then Azure has a kind of different uh, a different set of resources here. So there's like the cloud resources look different depending on what cloud you're in, and then GCP as well. And then we've also got like habitat specific ones. There are some other ones that are coming, like application specific ones. So there might be an Nginx. Let's say you get MongoDB resource. That's an OS resource, but I would class it as a application type resource. So it's not really an OS thing; it's an application thing. So the like there's I am IDM IBMDB is what I was trying to say. IBMDB or Postgres or MongoDB. Like those all of those databases have got their own like resources, which is quite nice. The configuration file resources and that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, so they
And so this means like you can just
sorry, go on.
oh, you can test for all of that.
Yeah.
Like
So you've got
every source.
you've got all the power, um,
Mm-hmm.
but then trying to write a single profile that rules everything. I wouldn't recommend that path. You could totally do that. Like you could say, like, if I'm on Linux and and I've got this kind of um, system manager, like system D, then run these tests. If I haven't got system
Mm-hmm.
D, then do some other thing. Some other thing. Um, and if I'm on AWS, you can detect what kind of cloud, and then run these, and then include the AWS profile. You could totally do all these switching. You might want to do that. You could have your AWS profile sort of kicking around somewhere, and then in your main profile, say, "Hey, if I'm AWS, include the AWS stuff," or GCP or that kind of thing. So you can sort of switch on and off resources and include them or not include them, which is quite nice, based on like cloud.
Nice.
So some like inspect detect. So there's a so inspect detect will detect a bunch of things about where you are. One of those things is like cloud or OS, so that kind of gives you like those things there. If you've come from the infra world, it's a little inspect detect is a little bit like OHI, where it detects a bunch of like system information. Um, in fact, I wonder if it's based off OHI in the background. I don't know, but yeah, hopefully that's helpful. If it wasn't helpful, let me know. I can continue rambling about something else. But I think back to the show. It's because your profile's
Yeah.
worked, isn't it? Now it's cool.
Yes, it is. It has worked. We've got so there's like 174 tests in this Linux baseline. Like we expected some to fail because we're running it against a brand spanking new out of the box virtual machine. So we've got 27 successful controls, 31 failures. But let's see. Um, and yeah, we've got like only 62 failed tests, but we did get through the process. I just kind of wanted to um show, you know, the execution here. Um one of the things I did also want to talk about was profile inheritance. Now, there's one of like so when you're using a baseline, right? You're going well, if you're using a baseline profile, you can probably um well, you can include controls from another profile. But let's talk about like how we include controls from a profile. We can have like a situation where I'll pull up the docs here because there's a really good graph or a really good visualization. Let me stop share and reshare. So you can include all of the controls. If you're creating a new profile, you want to include controls from like the Linux baseline profile. You can include controls. You can, run the command include controls in, and you'll target my baseline or the Linux baseline, however, and it shows you how you will end up um, including all of the controls from your baseline profile in this particular one. But you can also include only a few controls. And let's see, what you'll do in this situation is you would want to skip a particular control that you don't want to include. So if you say include controls from your Linux baseline and you want to skip a certain control, then you would specify which control that you want to skip following your skip control command. And let's see.
So we've got a couple of people on since we started. So if anyone's got any questions about inspec, just drop them in the chat. Whilst Kaya just gets a screen share reorientated back to the
Yep.
next profile. We've gone through some of the GCP stuff. Well, cloud provisioning stuff. We've got any questions about some OS specific things, or like how do I do this? How do I do that? Just let us know, and we can go through that again.
Oh, this is one I forgot to mention though, Dan. So, so say you want to like include, say you want to include only like a few controls. Instead of having controls in a profile, you can just like require controls from your baseline profile and then just specify the controls that you want to require or the ones that you want to include versus having to say, I want to skip all of these. If you want to only include one or two versus, the 60 plus that were in the Linux baseline, say you want to include one or two, just go ahead and use require controls and specify those versus having to skip the additional or the remaining 60 controls because that just is inefficient.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've gone over what a profile is, what controls do, what are control blocks, what describe blocks are. We've talked about we kind of talked about what the target was, but I think I actually mixed up my notes there. So let me go back to that. Um, Targets in this particular use case are node services. So like we can use Docker. We can use things like in this case we use Vagrant to spin up a VM. Um, and as Dan said earlier, we can go to the docs and figure out all of the options that we have for targets. But it could be cloud providers, um, pretty much anything, any type of machine. Also do it on your like you can target your local machine. I mean, if you want, right, Dan?
Yeah. I reckon I say regularly. No, I did it earlier on. Actually, I did it earlier on. So I was building about Go binary, and the Go binary just responds to a HTTP request.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you know what? Let's try it now. I could describe it, or I could just show you it. Let me
Oh,
just get my grab it. Yeah. So publish. Blah, 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 blah. Let me just go to this. So where are we? I've got a Docker file. In fact, I've got a binary that responds to HTTP requests. If I just open up a new terminal window, just run this a second. This won't do anything in this window. I've got no logging. It's disgustingly simple. And if I curl local host on 8080, it should come back with hello world. Fine. But then I can go inspec exec, and I didn't give it a target, which means it just by default targets the machine it's on.
oh,
Hey, but
yeah, that
bada
makes
bing,
sense.
bada boom. And
By default, that makes sense.
yeah, so it should be, and then it tries localhost. So the HTTP resource is a bit of an interesting one with targeting, kind of local target or remote target. So when you run inspec, it. I'm not going to finish the sentence off before I finish. Look at the docs because I can never remember which way around it is. But there's like a local mode execution and a remote mode
Mhm.
execution. So it will, one of the modes is it runs it from where inspec is running. So it'll run the HTTP command from where it's running, which is quite helpful about if you've got a container running up, standing up, and then uh, if you've got a container that stands up and then it stands up Nginx, and you want to check that Nginx is
Mhm.
configured from it from outside. You've also got a remote mode as well, so you can get into the container or get into the remote host as you would do normally, and then run inspect from there in the HTTP resource from there. So running curl from within the box or outside the box. The difference is if you're running it inside the box, you're testing the DNS things in the box, which is
Mm,
really, really, really helpful sometimes. That's actually caught a bunch of bugs for me. So externally from
okay.
the box, you're testing hostname resolution that the box, like the outside box, gets. If you then run that thing inside the container, you run um, you run that curl request against all of what I'm trying to say, the DNS that it uses the DNS in the container, so Docker DNS. So if you're trying to get to a sidecar container or something like
Whoa.
that kind of stuff, then it knows how to do that. So it's a completely different context. I will get my words out. That was actually
Gotcha.
really hard, but you get what I mean. There, so you can use
Yep.
different contexts there, which is quite nice. Um, in the history
Yeah.
resource,
And
you can do some status and bodies and that kind of stuff. So if anyone wants to go see any more of that, let us know. Um, but yeah, that's pretty simple. If I
nice.
stop this, hopefully
One of the
it should just
things,
go.
one of the features like called out is the fact that inspec is agentless, which means that a target system can be scanned for compliance without requiring anything but SSH, WinRM, or API access. So
It's really nice.
when you're using, yeah, like, so when you're like, you don't have to, like, you're not boxed in where that's concerned, you know.
Yeah, so it just allows you to target more things really.
Hmm.
Um, if they respond to HTTP requests, you can get a bunch of information back. The inspect docs are almost exhaustive. I think there's a couple of things that are missing at the minute when I last looked. Maybe not actually. So I poked about it. But yeah, they
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
forgot where I was going with that. I completely tangented off my head. Yeah.
Good. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, if there are any additional questions
Mm.
for about like inspect profiles, please drop them in the chat. And if there aren't any right now, and you guys are looking and in the, what is it, the ether? No, when you're watching on YouTube later and you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Or
Yeah.
not in the chat, but on the in the comments, and we go, and once a week we go and
Every
check to see if
Monday
there.
we check.
Yeah.
And if we haven't responded and you were like, hey, Dan, hey, Kara, I've got a question and I'm not waiting a week, I'm not waiting till Monday,
Hit us up
then
on
hit us up on
Slack.
Slack. That's the way it gets.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, we have an inspect room. So like if you've got a inspect specific question, hit us up on the inspect room on Slack, and chances and what your question.
Oh, for sure.
So it's to share the knowledge.
Yeah. So, actually, 174. Yeah. So, like, huge thanks for that question, everyone. It's a really interesting problem. Like, hey, I want to make this profile that's independent of platform. Is that, like, for a start, is that even a good idea? Now, I don't think it's a good idea, but I'd love to know what you think in the comments. You
Yeah.
might think that, like, yeah, why would I not want to do that? And I'll happily disagree with you in the comments.
Well, I mean, yeah, it seems
Yeah, right.
like even a platform agnostic profile. The idea, right?
Yeah,
I
totally
mean, it
right.
seems like it's a great idea, but in practice, some of you all may have tried it and ran into some snags. So, like, absolutely put it in the comments. in the inspec room so that we can keep it for in the repo.
Yep.
Go ahead and do that. Let us know your experiences.
Cool. All right. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us today. It's been an interesting journey. All right. Have a nice day.
All right.
Catch
Have a
you later.
nice day.